Hello and welcome back to the Solo RolePlayers Podcast. I'm your host PJ, and today on the show I have another solo RPG content creator who likes to sit alone in a room and play games by themselves. Today on the show we have Matt Risby from the excellent The Bad Spot, podcast as far as I consume it, but you make a YouTube video as well. Welcome to the show, Matt Risby.
Hey man, thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, I found The Bad Spot on my own. A lot of the guests we've had on have been people who inspired me to start playing, was why I started introducing this show and bringing guests on. But I recently played StarForged for the first time myself and wanted to get a bit of a feel for how other people were playing it. If I was doing it right, get some ideas, that kind of thing. And I came across your show, The Bad Spot, and I must say, I'm really, really enjoying it. I think it is one of the best examples of actually playing. It's not pure narrative. It's not pure, unedited, long pause playing, but rather it gives a really good feel for what it's like to actually play the game and how it built a narrative. Before we get to The Bad Spot and to StarForged, however, I imagine there is some story as to how you ended up alone in a room playing RPGs by yourself. How did we get here?
What's my origin story? That's
What's your origin story?
Necessity, I think. I had done podcasting for a long time. I spent nearly a decade making, my background is in kind of film and theatre, so I spent nearly a decade doing a film podcast called Shot Reverse Shot, and I really enjoyed doing it, but after a while, didn't really feel like I was adding much to the conversation, and there are a lot of film podcasts out there. When I left that in 2019, I think it was, or the end of 2018, I really had the desire to do an actual play. And at the time, we just finished, my regular home group had just finished a 2-year campaign of Dungeon World. And I thought, I'd really like to do something with this, but I just don't want 4 hours of some idiots playing and then explaining the rules and goofing off. I want something more narratively focused. And then after a while, I realized that the tech capabilities of doing, 4 people's recordings all at once, and also the logistical nightmare of getting 4 adults to commit to doing one thing at one time, kind of put me off. And then around that same time, I discovered Ironsworn, the original Ironsworn, and played one game of it, and I was like, oh, this could be something. And played it for a little bit, and then there was an announcement that StarForged was coming. So this would have been, the announcement would have been at some point in 2020. And I put out a tweet on, do you remember that website, Twitter? I don't know.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Don't know what happened to it. It's weird that it just disappeared. I put out a tweet saying that the day that this game comes out, I'll do an actual play of it, a solo actual play. And it was my way of making myself accountable. Yeah. And, willing it into existence by having the pressure of everyone, of my dozens of social media followers, putting me under pressure to do it. So I said that, and then didn't realize that when the crowdfunder went live, you got the preview edition of the game on day one. So I think the crowdfunder went up, and then within a couple of weeks, I had done a session 0 and 2 episodes, and kind of had them out. And that's it, really. And I mean, a lot of it was to do with lockdown as well. This was 2021 this started. I had been playing some Ironsworn online co-op with a friend of mine who was kind of stranded in Spain, to kind of keep him occupied, but also, explore some solo games. I'd never played any GM-less co-op games, sorry. But yeah, I was properly bitten by that bug, and the convenience of not being able to see anyone else really spurred a lot of this on. And I was like, well, hang on, I don't have to wrangle 4 people to the table and get 4 mics. I can just do this with whatever I've got right now.
Yeah. You said you were finishing up a home game there. Have you been into RPGs for a long time?
No, weirdly, a lot of people, because of The Bad Spot's relative popularity in terms of, like yourself, people go onto YouTube to learn how to do things these days. And if you type in how to play Ironsworn, one of my videos comes up because I made a whole series of videos about how to play Ironsworn. So I invariably get, a lot of people ending up on there, and a lot of people assume that I'm some authority on role-playing games, whereas the opposite is true. Like, I played role-playing games very briefly in the early 90s when I was about 11 years old. I played with the kid on my street. I was kind of into Warhammer kind of stuff and Hero Quest when I was a kid. And a kid on my street who was also into that had a couple of role-playing game books. I don't know where he got them from, but they were Call of Cthulhu, whatever edition that would have been around then. And also he had the wonderful Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness RPG, which is a terrible, terrible game, but a wonderful character creation system. And he lent me those. We tried to play Call of Cthulhu once, and I didn't understand it. I just running around trying to shoot stuff, and that wasn't the point of the game. And then he lent me the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book, and I kept it for like a whole year, and I never played it, but all I did was just roll up these characters, because it's got this system of rolling up random tables of generating these weird mutant creatures. And I just did that. And then that lasted about a year, and then I just never looked at role-playing games ever again until 2015. And a couple of friends of mine said that they wanted to play D&D. And as a weird coincidence, I had just discovered the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games. As a big Star Wars fan, I don't know whether I just saw a story about it on a website or something or followed it, but, I read about this game that involved non-binary success systems and these strange dice that you roll. It's now called the Genesis system. That's what that's gone on to be. So I said, hey, instead of playing D&D, which is not something I particularly fancy because I'm really not that into fantasy, why don't we play Star Wars? So I bought the book, bought the dice, and we got together. There was 3 of us who knew each other, and then some kind of friends of friends who had just joined in. And we still play games together now. And that was 10 years ago. So that was a really lovely... One of them was the guy who was stranded in Spain. So
is that you GMing then, or?
Yeah, so I just decided to GM, mainly because someone had to, right? And I think the control freak in me enjoyed the challenge of doing that. And it's funny, I've said this before in kind of things that, like, if I look back at how I did that now, it's wild because I don't play games now that require prep. I just don't play games that require prep.
Man, I've been hard.
Yeah, because I don't like. I've got thoughts about it, but like, I was like writing tens of thousands of words for that game like every week, with every shopkeeper having a backstory and a motivation, and I knew what was in their pockets. But it was whatever. You've got to kind of learn these lessons somehow. So that was it. Once I played that game, and we played that on and off for a couple of years. Then I joined the party, and one of the other players switched up to GMing it. And then we just started experimenting with finding other games. And we found Powered by the Apocalypse games, played a lot of, one-shots like Fiasco and 10 Candles. And I think once I went down that route of like, good grief, we are living through a golden age of indie RPGs where things are very interesting, and it's not just about tooling up with some swords and going with your mates down into a dungeon and stabbing some goblins. There's a lot out here to explore, and that is kind of what led me here. Yeah.
Tell me, you said you have thoughts about prep and that you don't like it.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I have... I've learned that I do not enjoy the dynamic of a GM behind a screen who knows everything and about the world and everything, and a bunch of players who are playing around in their world, because I think it is ego driven. I think the GM who is there preparing their world so he can watch people play around in it and get that satisfaction and get that ego boost from someone saying, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. I'm just not interested in that at all. And I can't think of anything more boring than me writing a story, like writing a world and having my players fumble around in it. I've always tried to incorporate a lot of collaborative world building in my games, but I've realized over the last 2 years, especially, that there are actually games that set up to do that as a principle, a core principle. And those are the types of games I enjoy playing. And I like playing games where I might be the GM, but we are all equal participants. We're all playing the same game, but it's just our rules that we have in front of us are different. Like my sheet is different to the player character sheet, for example. And, there are a lot more games out there now that facilitate that culture of play. And I'm not interested at all in the GM player relationship as it existed up until, in other games. I just do not enjoy it. And I'm not interested in it because that whole, if you take it to the most extreme example of the GM has all the information about the world, the players have all their information about their own characters that they've written, and they've got this big backstory that it's up to you to work in slowly, is you've basically got 5 people around a table slowly putting bits of information in front of everyone that they've already predetermined. And it's just not very interesting to me. It's not collaborative and it's not exciting. And no shade on anyone who does like that, because, a lot of people get a lot of enjoyment out of playing games where, they can just rock up and not have to worry about building the world. They can just play their character and just roll some dice and, more power to you. I love that you're having fun. But for me, I have drifted significantly off that course.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. But to be clear, it's not the world building part that you're not liking. It's the presenting that to a group of people and waiting for them to encounter it, right?
That's not storytelling. Storytelling isn't one person saying something and then watching other people just kind of fumble around in it, and say, no, that's wrong. Actually, that's nothing. That whatever. That's just not conducive to storytelling. If you want to collaboratively storytell, then everyone has to have an equal stake and everyone has to be able to take the narrative reins and take control of the story. And so much of the traditional relationship between games master and players is solely in the control of the GM, and the other people are just being told what to do. And that's the most extreme example. I mean, a lot of people don't play games like that, but I'm taking it to the extreme to kind of illustrate my point of like the worst type of play culture that I'm kind of forced away from.
Yeah, sure. And so presumably that's why you mentioned in your early episodes, I actually did something I've started doing when listening to shows like yours. I always now skip the session 0 stuff, listen to a few episodes, and then come back to it. And I find that infinitely more interesting than to sort of see where it grew from, rather than going in cold and then watching it come out of that. And so I went back just the other day and listened to your session 0s, and you say how much you love that StarForged / Ironsworn system of building the world, building the truths. What is it about that you really enjoy? And I mean, also the fact that you're not going to then be putting it in front of people, but it's just for you anyway. But what is it about that system that you enjoy?
Specifically the truth system, I enjoy the fact that there is so much latitude given to you from whatever you pick. You might think that picking one of 3 options to be true about your world in relation to a particular subject, say magic, for example, might be a bit prescriptive, but if you actually read, the prompt you pick, what you're doing is giving yourself a set of parameters within which to play around, and you are not at all beholden to stick to all those things. And one of the things I always encourage players to do of Ironsworn and StarForged and Sundered Isles as well is, to keep checking in on your truths every now and then. And I used to do it through that StarForged run, which is, kind of nearly 4 years old now.
Is it really?
Yeah, 2021 that StarForged run came out. And yeah, I always encourage people to, if you ever take a break and go back and think about, where is my story going? And I get people get in contact with me all the time about this. They're like, what would you do in this situation? Here is where I'm at with my game. How do you make journeys interesting? How do you make this interesting? And my answer is always something along the lines of check in with your story, like do something character based, like check back in with the story. And, you haven't got there yet, and no spoilers, but like you're going to get to points in this StarForged campaign where we just leave the main characters and go and see some other characters that we spent some time with, because something they're doing that isn't generated by me rolling dice or anything is going to tell us something about the world and what's going on in the story. And though that truths exercise that you do in the start of an Ironsworn game or a StarForged game is a really excellent scaffolding. It's not the building that you've got at the end. You are setting up the scaffolding with which to build your building. And, you know, it's very robust as a system, because if you get stuck and you're like, oh, I'm not sure how to handle something like this, I don't know where it chimes with the tone, because tone's a very important thing in role-playing games, right? And the truths exercise is a really elegant way of establishing the tone and the setting for your game. You can just go back to look and see what you rolled up or what you picked or whatever, and, you know, find yourself kind of back on the path that you want to be on. And in terms of world building, it leaves enough blank space to explore. Like some of the examples it gives of a truth might, you know, and each truth has got like a quest starter, a suggestion that you might want to just jump in off. Yeah. And they're always really evocative and they're really interesting. And, you know, it's just about stimulating ideas. And, you know, I don't want to do a bit of world building exercise at the start of the game and say, this is a set thing, this is this, and this is this. The truths exercise says, what is mostly true about your world? And then you go off and explore those things. And I love that. One of the founding principles of Powered by the Apocalypse games is the old, you know, draw maps and leave blanks, right? Well, you know, the truths exercise is you just plotting out one huge narrative map with a hell of a lot of blanks in it. And you get to just play around and explore that space, which I think is a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been exactly my experience as well with StarForged.
And it takes 40 minutes as well, which is, you know, as far as
astoundingly really succinct and clean.
Yeah.
So here's a question. I see a lot on Reddit and whatnot and Blue Sky, people recommending Ironsworn or StarForged to those who say, I'm really interested in solo RPGs, I want to get started, where can I start? Mm-hmm. You know, I see a lot of people recommending StarForged. I also talk to a lot of people who are more experienced than with playing, a lot of other content creators, that kind of thing, who specifically say they don't think StarForged or Ironsworn is a good starting point because it can potentially be overwhelming with the amount of narrative that is required of you. Mm-hmm. And I guess in my limited experience, the lack of mechanics to support you at every little instance. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that I agree with both. Like I can see why people would say it's a good solo game, a first solo game. And the main reason I would give is that it is designed for solo play. If you were to take Pathfinder or D&D or something and use the Mythic emulator, it's an additional step to play another game, right? Like just having the D&D manual isn't going to tell you how to play the game solo. Like this is built from the ground up for solo play. Yes, it does ask a lot of narrative questions of you, and I think that you need to be in a position that, like when I started playing Ironsworn, as soon as I started playing, I was like, oh yeah, this is for me. Like there wasn't really any doubt. That whole idea of like you make this character, you get your starting scenario or whatever, and then there's no one to tell you what to do. It is up to you to take that step off the cliff and see what happens. And that to me is thrilling. And I see it all the time on, you know, in Discord and on Reddit and stuff, that people are like, I don't know what to do. I've got no idea. And like, I get asked this question all the time, like, how do I get started? And it's like, I can see why that would cause you to clam up. Now, I think if you had played a couple of solo games before that were like journaling games or something, like Tangled Blessings or Anamnesis or something like that, those are really straightforward. You turn over a prompt, you write that prompt down, you turn over the next prompt. Like those games tell you what to do next. And I think once you've got the confidence in doing that, going back to Ironsworn or StarForged, if that's something you've struggled with, probably is a good idea. But like I've always said, the Ironsworn games will make you a better GM, like off the bat, because it forces you to think on your feet with nothing Like, as soon as I started playing it, I was like, this is instantly improving my GM skills because, you know, I have nothing to pull on. I cannot look at the module. I cannot dig a pre-made character out of somewhere. Like, I am going to have to roll 3 details in this table and make this interesting.
Yeah.
And that to me was a thrill. But to other people, I can see why that is totally, like, you know, off-putting. But, you know, not all games are for all people. And, you know, I know people who play solo games who just play, you know, cozy, twee journaling games, like little indie, like one-page rule things. And that's what you're into, there is a whole world of games out there for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of, you know, having to take on the cognitive load of what Ironsworn throws at you, I do understand it can be a little bit overwhelming. But you can start small and, you know, build your way out. And I think that's what I would advise to new players playing the game is to keep it relatively contained for the first couple of sessions and then start trying to do more expansive things.
Yeah. And was that your first solo/co-op GM-less experience when you started trying that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd played a couple of solo board games, and like solo card games like LCGs, things like Arkham Horror, the card game. So like I understood some of the principles of playing on your own, but that was my first role-playing game. And I think that was the first time I'd heard of a solo role-playing game. And when I heard that, I was like, I do not know how that works. And then when I read Ironsworn, and it was like, oh, you just envision something, and then if you're not sure, you roll on this table, and then you just envision again. You resolve this thing, and then you envision again. And it's understanding what that gameplay loop is. And then you'll find out once you start, you know, listening more and more to the StarForged. It amuses me so much that you're in the first season of StarForged now, because my long-suffering patrons, because my StarForged run from 2021 has just gone onto audio platforms, like it being on Spotify and on Apple Music and all the other places. That's a relatively new thing that happened at the end of last year.
Right.
As I was re-uploading them, I went back and listened to them. And I've not listened to them like in 4 years. So my patrons have been getting a little talkback video every 12 episodes. And the first 12 episodes of me was like, what was I doing? Like, what on earth? Because like you'll get there, like it is so different towards the end. And it amuses me greatly that you're saying it's a really good actual play, because I actually have to stop calling it an actual play as we go, because I no longer make actual plays of StarForged and Sundered Isles and Ironsworn. My show is made for an audience. It is an adaptation of my actual play, and that is how I approach it now. Because I mean, we'll get to it later, but like the way I make the show is so radically different to how I started making the show that it would be disingenuous to call it an actual play. So.
That is fascinating. And now I need another long flight back to Australia or something so I can catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want you to spoil anything for me because, you know, but a lot of the listeners probably are further ahead than I am with your stuff. Did those changes, without spoiling anything for me too much, did those changes in the way that you create the show, did they come through natural learnings? Did they come from feedback? Did they come from you getting bored, wanting something different? What changed it?
Mainly powered by my own incompetence. So the first 3 episodes of that show, I sat down with the books or the printouts of the books, the PDF with some dice, had my recorder on and just pressed record. And that was a nightmare. That first episode is hewn from about 5.5 hours of mumbling, retaking, not really understanding what I was doing, me just frustrated silences, and it was just so painful. I realized very quickly that I'm going to have to play the game on camera and off camera, and I'm like, they got very quickly to the point where I was like, right, I'll play for a little bit. When I get stuck, I'll just press stop and I'll walk away and I'll come back to it another time. And those early episodes, that first 12 episodes, was me making an episode over the course of a week. and I would just come back to it. I would record a little bit more, play until I got stuck, walk away, record some more. And then when you walk away, like I had some notes and I would maybe like punch some of them up if they were like, descriptive bits. And if I wanted to make them have more of an impact, I'd rewrite them a little bit. And that's how I made the first season of StarForged. That was still quite a long ass way of making the show, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until season 2 started, which I've just started doing the Patreon talkback for now. I realized that, like, if I was just playing this by myself, I'd maybe, set up at the kitchen table, roll some dice, journal for a little bit, put it all away, and then leave it, right? Whilst making StarForged, I was like, well, what if I never stop playing, right? What if I never actually sit down to play? And then that little kind of switch flicked in my brain. It was like, well, I've got the dice app on my phone. Like on the YouTube video, you'll see the dice rolls, right? That's a screen recording from my phone, right?
Okay. I must say, I've only listened to the audio. That's why I came across you. I don't watch a lot of YouTube, but
so if you watch the YouTube video, which all StarForged and the Ironsworn stuff is, I'm not on camera. It is audio, and then like the rules come up on the screen and dice rolls come up, and they're animated dice rolls. But that's a screen recording of a dice rolling app that I've got on my phone. For Sundered Isles and all my new videos, I'm on camera playing, right? So I've got my dice roller, I've got Google Docs on my phone, I've got the rule book on my phone. So like, I'll just think about what's going on. I'll be like, right, where was Archer the last time we left him? And then if I think of something in my head, I'll just jot it down in my notes. And if it comes to a dice roll, I'll make the dice roll, I'll record the screen. And then at the end of the week, I sit down and record it all together.
That's interesting.
And then that's what I mean. It's an adaptation of my game. It's all genuine. They're all roles that came. I didn't play it in 45 minutes that you're watching at the table. That is a distilled version of, a week's worth of me playing StarForged in fragments, right? Because
and then you go and sit down with your proper mic and sort of talk through your notes, basically.
Yeah, and if they're important notes, and you will realize very quickly as you get through this, the story becomes very complicated and becomes, there are bigger things. And I was like, well, this is actually an opportunity to make an AP for an audience, like to actually make something that's somewhere between an audio drama and an actual play. Like this is story and character all generated from game mechanics, right? But very quickly, when I started playing this, I started getting comments on the YouTube saying, really love these characters, really love the story. And I'm like, well, if people love those things, I'm gonna dial those up. Like, this is really interesting to me. This is not something that I see all the time. It's either someone playing for 5 hours and you're getting a real kind of like warts and all, version of their actual play, or they are written, games. This is kind of the same thing as, I get sent so many people's games, right? This is the problem with being I say it's a problem, like I'm complaining about this minor inconvenience of having people trying to share their games with me. And I actually really enjoy it. But like, I get sent so many people's games who have journaled it, and they send me 50, 60 pages of their game. And I always have to say, I love that you've sent this to me. I'm glad you're having fun, but I just don't have time to read all this. But this is no different, because those people have played the game and they've made notes, and then they've written it up. Written it up. Some of them have written them up as actual novels that have been released, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, why don't I do that in this format? Like, why don't I play the game and make it more interesting to listen to or watch as a show? And that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And the reason I don't call it an actual play anymore, because it's just not really fully an actual play. Like I always say, it's an adaptation of my game, and that's the best way I can kind of say it. But that idea that you're never not playing a solo game, because you're always thinking about it, and I shouldn't stop myself thinking about it because I'm not looking at the character sheet in front of me at the table. And the way that how elaborate some of the story strands get in my StarForged campaign, I had to sit down and really, really, really focus on how I was going to tie it all together. That's not something that would have been a disservice if I'd have just sat down and press record and roll some dice.
Sure. That is the magical thing, or one of the magical things about this hobby, though, right? Is it can just continue on in your head, in the background. That's my experience as well. I mean, I'm not then actually recording anything, but it is when I do the same thing, I stop a session and I walk away. For my first StarForged playthrough that I did, I just wasn't happy with where the story was going. And I'm still sort of getting a feel for it. It was pretty different to anything else that I'd done. And I'd had a decent amount of solo play experience at that point. And I wasn't happy. I'm like, yeah, but that sounds like we're going to have to break into like a CIA place and steal some. I don't want to do that. I want to go out in my spaceship, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I put it down and I went for a walk. I was out in the bush at the time and I walked past this rusted, dead sign hanging crooked off a fence that said the Endless Belt Mining Company or something, or mining services. I'm like,
that's
it.
Good.
The Endless Belt. That's what we have to get through, you know. And giving yourself, I think, permission to stop and walk away and let things tick over in your brain, I think can be really helpful. And I think people who sit down, there is so much struggle, I feel, on the internet, people getting stuck or not knowing what to do. And I would certainly say, don't be afraid to stop, walk away, change things, retcon stuff, you know, just let it happen. Yeah, you can't really do it wrong.
You're not beholden to the other people at your table because there's no one at your table. It's fine. You can just do what you want. And that's a very freeing thing. But I do appreciate that some people might find that quite terrifying. The idea of, you know, you can just do whatever you want is quite chilling to hear for some people who do require a bit more structure. And I get that. Like, I totally get it.
Yeah. And I think that's the point that I came across. Like I've never had problems not knowing what to do in these in solo games. I quite happy to roll stuff. I find it really exciting what filters into my brain after I look at two random words. You know, I always find that really exciting. If I don't like it, I roll it again, and you know. But I did have that little feeling of walking up to the cliff starting StarForged, because it starts out so prescribed and so hand-holding. It really is. And I'm like, this is a fantastic way for people to start, because it's do this, then that, roll this truth, then that truth. And there's almost no, apart from some interpretations, everything is contained in these nice, clean little sections and packages. And then you get to the end of that, it says, now go. And I did feel that cliff precipice a little bit at that point. And I think a lot of people get to that. You said that people are often sending you heaps of their work, of their reports or their plays or whatever else. And I do find there is a real desire in this hobby of sharing this with someone, perhaps because it is a solitary experience. I don't know. Is it not real unless you share it with someone else? Or I'm not sure what that is.
Well, that's one of the things that I got when I played the original Ironsworn, which I don't know if you played the original Ironsworn. Oh, it's great because it kind of changed my life just by playing it. But like, it's a very, I'll say that StarForged evolved the mechanics of the game quite a lot, and Ironsworn can be brutally unforgiving as a game, right? Which is another reason why some newer players balk at it, because if they're anything like my first character, and I've made videos about this, died in 45 minutes. Punched to death by the lowest ranked bandit that you could have in the book, because it can just be brutal. And if you haven't learned how to fail, which is a huge thing of playing StarForged, if you haven't learned how to kind of fail forwards, you will find yourself in what I call the failure cascade, and tailspin very quickly into scratching around on rocks, slowly dying, and or running out of food or kind of sanity. And you know, I had the experience of doing that for Ironsworn, and it's very similar in that you have a background vow and you have a current vow that you're doing right now. And I always found that moment where you're about to step off the cliff and you're like, what do I do now? You're like, well, I've got two options. I can investigate the pressing concern that's happening right now, or I can do something related to my background vow, which, is the way it's set up is that you tick that off very, very slowly. And you rarely get to actually complete your background vow, no matter how long you play, because it just something of epic rank, is, I think it's 40 marks of progress you have to make
which is filling 40 other tracks.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's something that always killed me about the Ironsworn games is you could have a really difficult expedition that's really tough, and it almost kills you several times, and it takes several sessions to get to it, and then but at the end of it, you're like, I get to mark progress on my background vow, and it's one tick. Yeah. Just, oh, great, and death by 1,000 cuts. But you always have options, and you always have somewhere to go, and that's always what I try and encourage people to do. But yeah, in terms of sharing, your stories, the reason that I was inspired to do it is because when I played the original Ironsworn, I was like, this has been amazing, but what is it? I don't have 4 other players that I can talk about it, how amazing it is, right? And I play on role-playing game tables now where, like, you finish a session and you're like, oh man, that was good, wasn't it? And you talk about what you loved about it. And then, last year I finished one of the best campaigns that the best campaign that I've ever been involved with, or any game ever. And, I went out for brunch the other day with some of the people that were at that table, and we just stopped and we just, oh man, that was a good campaign, wasn't it? But then with my Ironsworn game, I can't say that because there's no one who shared it with me. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to play co-op, because at least one other player is enjoying it. But then that's when I was just like, well, if I play it, it's like the tree falling in the forest. Like, if no one's there to see it, does it make a noise, right? And like, why don't I do something with it? And then, obviously making that promise to myself and to my 12 Twitter followers that I was going to do an AP of StarForged kind of really put me on that path to doing that.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about learning how to fail, because I think that's not just StarForged specific, but solo role-playing in general.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. And it's counterintuitive because you roll the dice, it says you've not done it, right? And, well, I better do something about that. But it doesn't take you very long to realize, especially in a game like Ironsworn, that if you keep piling on mechanical penalties rather than adding narrative consequence, you will find yourself having a terrible time very quickly. And, that's not something you can teach by writing some rules in a book. You can say, okay, well, you rolled a miss, and you take a hit to your health. That's a really obvious thing to do. Okay, well, in Ironsworn you've got 5 hit points, so you ain't going to last very long if you just keep doing that. So pay the price move says make the most obvious negative outcome happen. That's what it says.
Yeah.
But sometimes it might not be obvious, and that's hard for a person picking up a book and reading who's never played a solo game before to be like, well, hang on, what is define a narrative consequence? Like, what's a fair narrative consequence? And I think when you realize that there is no balance in these games, and you don't have to worry about balance, you can try and frame your failures in any way. And my ethos has always been, like, failure or a complication drives the story forward. Like, drama is the overcoming of a narrative obstacle. That's all that is. Mm-hmm. So failure is just a way of generating narrative obstacles. Where you have to get good at it with Ironsworn and StarForged is like, okay, I've now got too many narrative obstacles in the way, and if I'm going to be, and this happened in my co-op game with my friend Tom, like, we just kept not taking mechanical penalties. I'd learned that lesson, but we kept adding narrative things, and all we'd done was try and get a sail up river to the next village, which was like half a kilometer away. Yeah. And we looked at our map after about 4 sessions. We were like, how on earth are we in a different region? Yeah. Because we said we'd help some kid carry some lumber into the woods. It was just like, okay, like, sometimes, and I've learned this, you might have to bank a complication, right? Yeah. You might roll a miss and you're like, right, well, actually now it will make no real sense if I really harshly punish my character, but what if I save that? And, you'll see if you keep listening to my StarForged game, there's a lot of times where I'm like, hey, do you remember that thing that happened 4 sessions ago? Well, here comes the pain, because it's going to be paid down tenfold with interest. Like it's a hard thing to. I made a video. It was one of my most popular videos, is learning how to fail, playing Ironsworn, and it's something that you just kind of find the right pitch for between, and you should take mechanical penalties sometimes. It should be a nice mix of them, and finding that balance is a really kind of hard thing you have to learn. And that's why I kind of say don't go too hard too soon playing Ironsworn. Just, be a bit kinder to yourself and kinder to your characters,
which they state specifically in the rule
it does
book
say
as
it.
well. I noticed was nice.
Yeah, but it is pretty difficult to see it first of all when you're like rolling dice and you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll just take hits of my spirit, rather than finding a more interesting way of framing that failure.
Yeah. I am a new owner of the Sundered Isles stuff as well. I backed that on Kickstarter too. I haven't started it yet. I flicked open the book and I saw immediately the thing about the 2 different moons.
Yeah.
And I thought, that looks awesome. I like that. And I have a red and a black die D10, so that's
Handy.
perfect. You said there was an evolution going from, like a mechanical and design evolution going from Ironsworn to StarForged. Is there a similar, if not evolution, then alteration or change going into Sundered Isles?
No, Sundered Isles is the same rules as StarForged.
Okay.
So there are 2 games in the Ironsworn family. There is Ironsworn and Ironsworn StarForged. Sundered Isles is an expansion for StarForged. It's a setting book for StarForged. So it uses 99% of the same rules. The same moves. The moves in Ironsworn are very different to, they are different to the moves in Ironsworn StarForged. Like, combat is completely different in Ironsworn. There is a system with which you can do damage rather than marking the progress on an objective. But Sundered Isles, the rules-specific oracles, the setting-specific stuff is what comes in the Sundered Isles book.
Okay, so tables and characters and
there is like the moons, the twin fates mechanic. There is a cursed mechanic. So the oracles now have a cursed result.
Nice.
And the rules of the game state that when you roll a result on the oracles, roll a separate dice at the same time. And if it's a 10, then your result is cursed, and there is now a separate oracle to roll on, a cursed verse. So let's say you find some treasure. There's a treasure oracle, and then there's a cursed treasure oracle. And it's a really interesting way. In my Sundered Isles game, I decided to play that any roll that's odd is cursed. So my game leans heavily into the supernatural. So it's basically a coin flip if it's cursed or not.
Yeah.
And that's been very fun to play through. But yeah, the rules for Sundered Isles, some of the moves I think are slightly worded differently to, like, say, the journey, for example, don't name a ship. They name your sailing ship rather than a spaceship.
Sure.
But yeah, and also the assets that you use some of them are cross-compatible, so you can use them in Sundered Isles and StarForged.
Oh, nice. I'll have to dig out the deck and check out what I can bring across.
Yeah, it's very cool.
When I originally looked you up, the first thing that came up, which was really exciting for me because I had no idea of this news, but there have been, according to you and presumably other places on the internet, I haven't dug any deeper into it, but there have been announcements for future StarForged material, which is very exciting to me, presumably for you too. But also is it a second edition of Ironsworn or an evolution of Ironsworn coming down the track?
Yeah, so Sean announced this in a thing to the Kickstarter backers, and I then made a video at the start of this year, which is basically anyone looking for a new game in 2025. I made a kind of overview of what you need to play Ironsworn and StarForged, and at the end of that I kind of stated the roadmap of what's coming that's been announced. And yeah, there are 2 expansions of StarForged which are coming next year. They are called Crucible, which is about exploring megacities, kind of like urban environments in StarForged. And there is Planetside, which is expanded planet exploration oracles, which is really interesting because the planet and planet side opportunities and things you can roll up in the StarForged core rules are pretty expansive. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And then 2028 is the 10th anniversary of the original Ironsworn, and there is Ironsworn 2nd edition, which I believe is tentatively titled Ironsworn Sagas. Mm-hmm. And from what I gather, and I don't have any inside information on this, I do from time to time poke Sean to see if he'll spill the beans, and I sent him the script for that video to make sure that it was factually correct, and he didn't add anything more to it. So I've got no juicy inside gossip, but I believe one of the core concepts around Ironsworn Sagas is that it allows you to play a character over an expanse of time. Mm-hmm. And have a saga and a legacy to your story, rather than just being focused more on several weeks of one person's life.
Yeah. And do you have any hopes for other changes or updates within the Ironsworn system?
I don't think, I could play Ironsworn forever.
Do you still play it?
Yeah, so my Ironsworn StarForged run ended last April. So that went for 3 seasons and 60 episodes. And then I started my Sundered Isles run not long after the game dropped digitally. And we are currently at the mid-season break of that. So my next episode is the first episode of the second half of my Sundered Isles story. So yeah, on my channel now, I generally have kind of branched out and play some more games that aren't Ironsworn, which is a very tricky path for me, because if you ask my audience, hey, what do you want me to see me play? They're like, Ironsworn.
Yeah, you're kind of the Ironsworn guy, right?
That's it. That's why I have a podcast on my show called The Ironsworn Guys. Yeah, me and Steve Morrison do it because we are colloquially known as the Ironsworn Guys. Oh, nice. So yeah, but last year was a bit of a kind of toe in the water. I played a few different games on my channel, and this year, while Ironsworn games will still be the main game that I play, you're going to see a lot more different games on the channel from me.
Do you always play for recording, or do you play alone? Without tech?
So I don't play StarForged or Ironsworn on my own anymore. I do play a bunch of other solo games by myself. Just recently did a playthrough of Void 1680 AM, which is an amazing game where you play a radio DJ and you program an hour of radio with songs that you generate using playing cards.
What a cool idea. And
then you generate callers who call in, and then you record all this. You record them, the prompts and everything that it gives you. You talk about who the callers were. And if you send the recording, this is the best thing. I love talking about Void 1680 AM. If you send the recording to the guy who wrote the game, he broadcasts it on AM radio using the tower that's in his garden. Now,
legend. I
know, right? So it's Ken Lowry who wrote this game. He also wrote the game, came out last year, called No Tell Motel. Did you hear about that one?
No.
It's really good. But I did my Void 1680 playthrough. But I did it, and I was like, do you know what would be interesting? Why don't I ask a bunch of actors to play the callers, and I give them the prompts, and they send them to me, and I'll edit it together, and we'll have a bit more of a product. And then I regret to inform you that it got out of hand. So after I did that, I was like, well, hang on. Well, what if I got people on to be do fake adverts?
Of course.
And I got people on to do adverts. I got people to record stingers. I got someone to come on and read the news. And what actually happened is I ended up playing a solo game that's supposed to take an hour over the course of 2 months and involved 8 people. And thankfully I sent it off. It was just, the thing is, there's no way I can put it on my channel because it would just be pulled for copyright, right?
Right.
So I gave it to my patrons, and my patrons really enjoyed it. And then I sent it to the guy who wrote the game, Ken Lowry, and he is broadcasting it on AM radio on the 2nd of March at 2 a.m. UK time. But it'll also be live streamed on his YouTube channel. And I'm really proud of that. I'm proud of it mainly because it's such a dumb idea to take a solo game that's supposed to be like, an hour's recording and like 12 songs that you like, and that's it. And I managed to make it this huge endeavor with like, beds and jingles and all this sound editing.
Wonderful.
Because that's the kind of dumb stuff I do.
I love it. Love the dumb stuff. Matt, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Would you like to just tell the listeners where they can keep in touch with you, where they can find out more about you, where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube at The Bad Spot. I've dropped the cast off the end of the name because it's now more video. You'll find on there, my playthroughs of Ironsworn, StarForged, Sundered Isles. You'll also see me playing games with tables like Trophy Dark and Dead Bell. And this year I've got some stuff I can't talk about because it's kind of secret and NDA'd, but like there's more narrative first games coming from me this year and a bunch of solo games as well. Some of which I've mentioned in this show, and you have to pick through and find out which ones they are. But yeah, and you'll find me on Blue Sky. It's a shame that they got rid of Twitter, but it's not a good place now. So you'll find me on Blue Sky at The Bad Spot. And I think that's it. I don't really have too many other places you can find me. Oh, and you can find The Bad Spot on Spotify and iTunes and stuff like that if you want to go back to the beginning and listen audio only without adverts in it, because that's the crushing thing about YouTube is
breaks the flow.
It does break the flow.
Thank you so much. I will put as many of those links as I can find into the show notes of this show, and I look forward to maybe talking to you again one day in the future about more solo RPG goodness.
Lovely. Thank you very much for having me on.